The night had moved gently toward its middle hour when Mara entered the glass walk. She carried the logbook beneath one arm, with the pencil tucked along its spine. Between two pages lay the practical ripening guide she had found with the old fruit crate during her work in the room of winter fruit. She had copied its useful instructions into the log, but the folded sheet still rested there for the moment, pale at the creases and faintly scented with the oranges she had sorted beneath the shaded lamp. Behind her, that work was complete. The labels had been checked, the baskets left in order, and the fruit arranged according to the day gardener's plain advice. Ahead, at the far end of the glass walk, the observatory roof waited for its own kind of preparation. Mara did not hurry toward it. The glass walk was a place that gave each footstep room. Its panes held a dim reflection of the interior lamps, so that the lights seemed to continue beside her in a second, quieter line. Beyond the glass, the coast lay under thin cloud. There was no hard boundary between sea and sky from here, only different depths of gray and the occasional softening of light where the cloud grew thinner. The air in the walk was cooler than the room she had left. Mara felt the change first across her hands and then at her face. It was one of the useful things about moving slowly through the conservatory at night. Each room announced itself before she had to look at an instrument or write down a figure. Warmth lingered in one doorway. Moisture rested in another. Here, the long panes and the dark outside gave the air a clean, even cool. She stopped beneath the nearest lamp and opened the logbook. The ripening guide lay across the page she needed. Mara lifted it by one corner, refolded it along its old lines, and placed it farther back in the book. Its notes belonged to the work already done. Which fruit could remain in a shallow basket, which should be turned, and which would color more evenly near the shaded lamp. The observatory required a different list, though the manner of care was much the same. Look closely. Move only what needed moving. Leave a clear record for the person who came next. At the top of the fresh page, she wrote the time. The pencil made a dry, companionable sound. She noted the thin cloud and the condition of the glass walk, then paused to listen to the building around her. There was no sudden noise and nothing demanding attention. The conservatory held the small, continuous sounds of a place at rest. The faint movement of air, the quiet settling of its frame, and the soft contact of her sleeve against the logbook as she closed it again. The route to the observatory rose gradually from the far end of the walk. Mara continued toward it, keeping one hand free for the rail. Before beginning the upward path, she took the folded cloth she had brought for the preparation and ran it along the top of the handrail. It was not a matter of scrubbing. The rail was already clean. This was simply the night check. A slow pass of the cloth to collect the slight film that gathered near cool glass, followed by a look along the surface in the low light. She folded the cloth once, wiped the next section, and moved on. Her hand followed afterward, confirming that the rail was dry and comfortable to hold. The task gave her an easy pace. Wipe, fold, step. Wipe, fold, step. As she climbed, the warm pools of light along the glass walk fell gently below her. The observatory roof did not feel separate from the conservatory so much as it felt like the final, quiet lift of the same structure. The framing grew simpler. The air became a little cooler. Above, the thin cloud spread across the roof panes with a soft brightness behind it. At the upper landing, Mara stopped before the roof mechanism. She set the logbook on the level surface beside it, placed the pencil on top, and folded the cloth into a neat square. Nothing about the mechanism called for force or haste. Its purpose was to move a section of the roof in a slow, controlled way, and the preparation began before any movement at all. Mara first looked along the visible track. She followed it from one end to the other, checking that it was clear and evenly seated. Then she examined the points where the moving section met the fixed frame. The edges were aligned. The glass was dry on the inside. Outside, the cloud remained thin and still, softening the sky without bringing rain against the panes. She rested her palm lightly on the handrail and let her eyes travel around the observatory roof. The space was modest and practical. Its glass gave an open view when the weather allowed, while the mechanism made that openness gradual rather than abrupt. At night, the low lamps were enough to show the path, the rail, and the working parts without filling the roof with glare. Mara could see what she needed to see, and beyond that, the clouded sky could remain quietly itself. She opened the logbook again and wrote down the condition of the track and frame. The folded ripening guide shifted slightly when the cover moved. Mara pressed it flat with the back of her fingers. For a moment, the two tasks sat together in the same book. The warm room with its oranges and shaded lamp, and this cool roof beneath thin cloud. One had required baskets, labels, and patient turning. The other required a clear path, a dry rail, and a mechanism tested at its proper speed. Neither was complicated when given its own sequence. She returned the pencil to the page and added that the handrail had been wiped. Only then did she place one hand on the control for the roof mechanism. She did not begin a full opening. This was the preparatory test, the first measured movement that confirmed the parts were traveling as they should. Mara settled her feet, relaxed her shoulders, and applied slow, even pressure. The mechanism answered with a low, steady movement. The roof section shifted only a little along its track. The change was so gradual that the reflections on the glass seemed to slide rather than break. A narrow line of cooler night air entered from above and moved across the observatory roof, touching Mara's forehead and the backs of her hands before passing down toward the glass walk. She watched the track while the section moved. There was no catch and no uneven pull. The opening widened by a small, deliberate amount, then stopped when she released the control. Mara waited there for a few breaths, looking first at the resting position and then at the line of the frame. The cloud above remained pale and thin. Through its softer patches, the night held a muted depth, enough to suggest the open sky without asking to be studied yet. That would come later in the round, after the observatory had been fully prepared. For now, her work was only to make the space ready. She reversed the control with the same light pressure. The section returned slowly. The narrow current of air diminished, the reflections settled into their earlier places, and the roof met its frame without a jolt. Mara kept her hand in position until the movement was complete. Then she removed it and looked along the join once more. Closed evenly, she wrote in the logbook, "Test smooth." The words took only a moment. She left the pencil resting across the open page while she made one final pass around the small roof space. Her footsteps remained even, neither hurried nor hesitant. She checked the rail she had wiped, the clear track, and the low lamps marking the return toward the glass walk. Everything required for the next stage of preparation was in order. Mara folded the cloth once more and placed it with the logbook. Before closing the cover, she made sure the old ripening guide was secure between its pages. It would return to its proper place when she completed the night's records. Until then, it was a quiet reminder of the room behind her. Oranges resting in their bowl, a shaded lamp giving steady warmth, and ordinary instructions made useful by careful hands. She closed the logbook and stood for a moment beneath the observatory glass. The roof was closed. The mechanism had moved smoothly. The handrail was clean and dry. Below, the lamps of the glass walk continued in their calm line, ready to guide her back whenever the next part of the round was done. Mara rested one hand on the rail and looked toward the mechanism she would use again. There was no uncertainty in the task now, only the familiar order of preparation. Inspect, clear, test, record. The observatory roof waited beneath the thin cloud, quiet and ready for the careful work to continue. Mara remained at the upper landing after the preparatory test, with one hand resting lightly on the dry rail. The roof was closed again beneath the thin cloud. The mechanism had moved smoothly through its short trial, and the narrow breath of cooler air had faded from the observatory. Below her, the lamps along the glass walk made a warm, orderly path through the panes. Now that the first movement had been tested, she could make the full inspection round. She opened the logbook on the level surface beside the mechanism. The folded ripening guide remained secure between the earlier pages, and the pencil lay across the fresh entry she had begun. Track clear, frame aligned, handrail wiped, test smooth. Mara read the 4 notes once, not because she had forgotten them, but because the written order gave a useful shape to the work still ahead. The roof mechanism was simple when taken one part at a time. There was the control beneath her hand, the visible track along the moving section, the meeting edges of the fixed frame, and the slow travel of the glass overhead. Each part could be looked at without making the whole task feel larger than it was. She picked up the folded cloth and began at the landing. The first stretch of rail was already clean from her walk upward, but she passed the cloth beneath it now, feeling along the cooler underside where moisture might gather unseen. The fabric came away dry. She folded it to a fresh side and moved around the modest roof space, following the rail at the same even pace. The low lamps showed the surface clearly without throwing a bright reflection onto the glass. Mara checked each pool of light as she passed through it. None of the lamps flickered. Their glow joined gently at the edges, leaving no sharp change between one step and the next. At the far side of the observatory roof, she stopped and looked back toward the control. From here, she could see the route as a morning visitor might see it. The gradual rise from the glass walk, the handrail continuing around the landing, and the roof mechanism set where it could be used without blocking the path. Nothing had been left to cross the way. Her logbook and pencil rested together on the level surface. The cloth was in her hand. The route remained open and plain. She turned her attention upward. The moving section of roof glass sat evenly within its frame. The thin cloud beyond it gave the pane a muted gray sheen, while the lamps below appeared only as faint, softened shapes. Mara followed the meeting edge from one end to the other. At each point, the line remained straight. There was no gap where the section should have been closed, and no place where one edge sat higher than the other. She lowered her gaze to the track. Rather than merely looking along it from the control, she walked beside as much of its length as the rail allowed. She kept the cloth folded in one hand and traced the route with her eyes. The track was clear. Its surface held a soft, even dullness in the low light. Nothing rested in its path, and the moving section had returned to its proper closed position after the test. At the end of the visible run, Mara paused. The air here was slightly cooler than at the head of the glass walk, though the roof had closed some minutes before. She could feel the difference across her knuckles where they curled around the cloth. It was a comfortable change, clean and mild, one more small temperature boundary within the conservatory. She returned to the landing and set the cloth beside the logbook. Before moving the roof again, she checked the glass walk below. The lamps continued in their calm line. The handrail she had wiped was dry beneath them, and the panes held the night at a quiet distance. Beyond the conservatory, the coast remained under thin cloud. There was no rain on the observatory glass, only the pale spread of the sky and a deeper gray where the sea lay beyond view. Mara placed her feet as she had before, comfortably apart. She rested one hand on the control and kept her other hand free. This time, she allowed the mechanism to travel farther. She applied slow, steady pressure. The roof section began to move with the same low, even sound it had made during the short test. Mara watched the near edge first. It drew away from the fixed frame by a narrow measure. then continued along the track without wavering. The reflections of the lamps shifted gradually across the pane. Cooler air entered from above. It did not rush into the observatory. It arrived as a gentle current, touching Mara's face and passing over the open logbook. One corner of the page lifted slightly and settled again beneath the pencil. The folded ripening guide remained farther back between the covers, held safely in place. Mara kept her attention on the moving section. She watched the line of the track, the pace of the travel, and the widening space beneath the clouded sky. The roof opened slowly enough that every change could be followed. More of the outdoor coolness reached the landing. The glass walk below seemed warmer by comparison, its lamps more golden against the gray beyond the panes. When the roof section reached the position needed for preparation, Mara released the control. The movement ceased gently. She left her hand near the control for a moment and inspected the resting position. The section sat evenly on its track. The open space above was broad enough for the observatory's ordinary use, yet the room still felt sheltered by its surrounding glass. Thin cloud covered the sky, softening the darkness into quiet layers. Mara walked the short inspection path again. At the first lamp, she looked upward along the moving edge. At the next, she checked the rail and the clear floor beneath it. She continued to the far side, where the cooler air was most noticeable, and stood there for several breaths. The open roof changed the room without disturbing it. The conservatory's warmer air met the coastal night in a gradual, comfortable exchange. She returned to the logbook and picked up the pencil. "Full movement even," she wrote. Then, after looking once more at the open section, she added, "Resting position aligned." The pencil made its dry sound across the paper. Mara placed it beside the book rather than across the page, leaving the entry open while she completed the return movement. Her hand settled on the control again. She reversed it with the same unhurried pressure. The roof section began its slow journey back along the track. The open band of sky narrowed little by little. The cooler current weakened, though a trace of it remained around the rail and against the glass. Mara watched until the moving edge approached the fixed frame. She eased the pressure without interrupting the steady pace. The section came home gently and met the frame without a jolt. Its low movement ended, and the observatory returned to its enclosed quiet. She removed her hand from the control. For a little while, she simply observed. The reflections of the lamps settled. The page of the logbook lay still. The thin cloud remained visible through the roof, now softened again by the closed pane. Nothing had shifted out of place during the movement. Mara walked the joining edge once more. She looked along the track from the far side, then from the landing. The roof was seated evenly. The rail remained dry beneath her palm. The route down to the glass walk was clear. She returned to the logbook and completed the entry. Closed evenly after full preparation check. There was no need to add more. The work itself had been exact, and the record could remain plain. Mara closed the book partway, then stopped before bringing the cover down. The older ripening guide showed faintly between the pages behind her new entry. Its folded edge recalled the warm room of winter fruit, the shallow baskets, and the oranges resting beside their shaded lamp. That earlier work had passed naturally into this one. Baskets and labels had given way to rails, glass, and a slow-moving roof, but the rhythm remained familiar. Inspect, handle carefully, return each part to rest, and record what the next person would need to know. She tucked the pencil along the spine and lifted the logbook beneath one arm. The folded cloth went into her free hand. Before leaving the upper landing, Mara made one final circuit without touching the mechanism. She followed the rail, passed through each low pool of lamplight, and looked along the clear path. The roof stayed closed beneath the thin cloud. The mechanism had completed both movements smoothly. The observatory was ready for the next part of the round. She began down toward the glass walk. Her hand moved easily along the rail she had wiped. With every few steps, the air became a little warmer. The line of lamps rose around her again, reflected in the long panes so that the glass walk seemed to hold two quiet paths side by side. The one beneath her feet, and the dimmer one suspended in the glass. At the bottom of the gradual descent, Mara turned and looked back. From here, the roof mechanism was partly hidden by the angle of the landing, but the closed section above it could still be seen. Its edges were even, and the thin cloud rested beyond the pane like a pale layer of cloth. The observatory no longer felt like a task waiting at the far end of the conservatory. It had entered the order of her round. Mara opened the logbook beneath the nearest lamp to check that her last line was dry. As she turned the cover back, she noticed the visitor register resting where it belonged near the observatory route. She had passed it while concentrating on the rail and the mechanism, seeing only that the path around it was clear. Now, with the inspection complete and the roof settled, there was time to give it her attention. She placed the logbook beside it and laid the folded cloth neatly to one side. The roof mechanism needed nothing further just then. Behind her, it remained closed and ready beneath the cloud. Ahead of her lay only the next quiet part of the observatory's preparation. A few ordinary pages, kept for the people who used this modest roof when it was open to the public. Mara rested her hand on the cover of the register, while the lamps of the glass walk continued their steady glow around her. Mara rested her hand on the cover of the visitor register, while the lamps of the glass walk continued their steady glow around her. The book lay on a narrow shelf, near the observatory route, exactly where she had noticed it after completing the roof inspection. It was a modest thing, neither decorative nor especially old. Its dark cloth cover had softened at the corners from ordinary handling, and a small paper label on the front bore two plain words: Visitor Register. Mara set her own logbook beside it. The folded cloth remained neatly to one side, and her pencil was tucked along the logbook's spine. Behind her, the observatory roof stayed closed beneath a thin cloud. The mechanism had completed its full preparation check smoothly. Nothing there needed her attention for the moment. She lifted the visitor register from the shelf. It had a comfortable weight, the sort made by many pages rather than heavy binding. When she opened it, the cover gave easily at a familiar place. The paper inside was thick enough to accept different pens and pencils, and the entries had been arranged in simple columns: date, sky, and notes. There were no elaborate accounts. Most visitors had written only a line or two. Mara turned back several pages, letting them move beneath her thumb one at a time. The entries were spread across clear nights, clouded evenings, and those quieter occasions when only a small part of the sky had remained visible. Some handwriting leaned forward. Some stood upright and careful. A few lines were printed in large, deliberate letters. All of them belonged to ordinary visits to the same modest roof. She stopped at a page where the writing was especially easy to read. The first entry noted that the roof had been opened for a public, stargazing hour. The visitor had seen the moon above the coast, followed by one bright planet through a thinner part of the sky. The note ended by saying that the slow roof had given everyone time to become accustomed to the cooler air. Mara read the sentence once more. She could understand exactly what the writer meant. During her own test, the roof had not changed the space all at once. The opening had widened little by little. Cooler air had entered gently, and the reflections had traveled across the glass without breaking apart. A person standing at the rail would have time to feel the room change around them before looking upward. The next entry was shorter. A visitor had come on a cloudier evening, and written that only a few stars appeared between the pale layers overhead. The group had waited for a while, learned where to look, and enjoyed the glass walk on the way down. That was all. No special occasion had been required. The observatory was not waiting for a rare event or for people with expert knowledge. It opened so members of the public could come quietly after daylight hours, stand beneath the moving roof, and look at whatever the ordinary sky offered. On some evenings, that might be the moon; on others, a bright planet or a scattering of stars. Under more cloud, it might simply be the changing light above the coast and the calm walk back between the panes. Mara held the register open beneath the lamp. The discovery settled into place without asking anything further of her. The small observatory roof had a plain public use. Its clear track, dry handrail, low lamps, and careful mechanism were prepared so that visitors could gather there comfortably for ordinary stargazing. The slow movement was part of that comfort. It allowed the roof to open without haste and close in the same measured way when the hour was finished. She turned one more page. Several blank lines remained after the latest entry. Mara did not fill them. They belonged to future visitors who might record a clear view, a clouded one, or simply the pleasure of standing beneath an open section of sky. There was no need for her to predict what they would write. She closed the register gently and looked at its paper label again. The shelf beneath it was clean, though a faint line in the surface showed where the book usually rested. Mara ran one finger along the edge, then used the folded cloth to make a single light pass over the open part of the shelf. The cloth collected only a trace of dust. She folded it inward and set it down again. Before returning the register, she checked the position from which she had lifted it. It belonged with its spine toward the observatory and its label facing the glass walk, easy to notice without standing in the path. Mara placed it back within the faint outline it had left on the shelf. She adjusted it by less than the width of a finger until it sat squarely. The dark cover looked quiet beneath the lamp. Mara opened her own logbook. The folded ripening guide rested safely between the earlier pages, carrying with it the memory of the warm room of winter fruit, the old crate, and the oranges arranged beside the shaded lamp. She turned to the observatory entry and read the lines she had already made. Track clear, frame aligned, handrail wiped, test smooth, full movement even, resting position aligned, closed evenly after full preparation check. Beneath those notes, she added one plain line. Visitor register checked and returned to shelf. Her pencil moved with its familiar dry sound. She paused, then added a few more words to make the use of the roof clear for anyone reading the night record later. Public stargazing register in order. That was enough. She did not copy the visitors' remarks into her own book. Their entries were already where they belonged, and the meaning of them required no longer explanation. The roof was prepared for ordinary public evenings beneath the sky. Tonight, it remained closed under thin cloud, while she completed the rest of her work. Mara laid the pencil across the open logbook and looked back toward the gradual rise to the observatory. From the glass walk, only part of the upper landing was visible. The rail caught a little of the lamplight. Above it, the roof panes held the pale gray of the cloud, and the closed section sat evenly within its frame. The space no longer seemed like a mechanism alone. She could picture its practical arrangement when visitors arrived. A clear route upward, hands resting on the dry rail, low lamps preserving the view, and the roof beginning its slow travel when everyone was settled. The thought was complete and comfortable. It made no demand on another night. She turned her attention to the small area around the shelf. The visitor register was in place. Her own logbook lay open. The cloth had been folded to keep the dusty side inward. Nothing blocked the path between the glass walk and the observatory landing. Mara closed her logbook, leaving the pencil along its spine. She lifted both the book and the cloth, then took one slow step back to see the shelf, as a visitor would see it on the way down. The label could be read beneath the lamp. The register sat straight. The passage remained clear. Outside the panes, the coast stayed beneath thin cloud. The weather softened the view without changing the order of the room. Reflections of the interior lamps continued beside Mara in the glass, forming the same second line of light that had accompanied her on her arrival. She placed her free hand on the rail and felt its smooth, dry surface. The small discovery had already found its ordinary ending. She knew why the register was kept there and what kind of visits it recorded. People came to look at the public night sky, and the observatory was prepared so they could do so calmly. The register had been read, checked, and returned. No question remained waiting in its pages. Mara moved toward the next part of the round at an easy pace, carrying her logbook and folded cloth. Behind her, the visitor register rested on its shelf. Above, the roof remained closed beneath the cloud. Ahead, the familiar rail and pools of lamplight offered a few simple surfaces to tend, each ready for the same gentle sequence of looking, wiping, setting straight, and recording. Mara moved toward the next part of the round at an easy pace, carrying her logbook and folded cloth. Behind her, the visitor register rested squarely on its shelf. Above, the roof remained closed beneath the thin cloud. The public purpose of the observatory was clear now, and there was nothing more to learn from the pages. What remained was the simple work of leaving the mechanism and register ready for their next ordinary use. She stopped beneath the lamp nearest the shelf and set the logbook down. The visitor register had been returned to its faint outline, but the space around it still bore the small signs of frequent handling. A narrow mark ran along the front edge of the shelf where the book had been lifted and replaced. The paper label on the cover sat flat except at one corner, which had risen just enough to catch a line of lamplight. Mara unfolded the cloth to a clean side. She did not lift the register again at once. First, she wiped the open section of shelf beside it, drawing the cloth slowly from the back edge toward herself. Then she passed it along the front, where fingertips sometimes rested while the book was opened. The movement left the surface even and dull beneath the low lamp. She folded the cloth inward, keeping the used side enclosed. Only then did she lift the register with both hands. Its place on the shelf showed clearly now. A soft rectangle in the finish, made over time by the same object returning to the same position. Mara wiped within that outline, once from left to right and once along the back edge. There was very little dust. The task was not meant to transform the shelf. It was simply meant to keep a familiar surface pleasant to use. She set the book down again, spine toward the observatory, and label facing the glass walk. The raised corner of the paper label remained. Mara smoothed it gently with the side of her thumb. It settled against the cloth cover without resistance. She held it there for a moment, then removed her hand. The label stayed flat. Visitor register. The words were plain beneath the lamp. Anyone coming down from the roof would see them easily. Anyone going up could pass without the book, narrowing the way. Mara stepped back and checked the path. The shelf stood clear of the rail. The register was square. The folded cloth and her logbook remained together rather than spreading across the surface. Above the gradual rise, the closed roof held the pale reflection of the thin cloud. There was one more small maintenance check she could make before leaving the area. During the roof test, the moving section had traveled evenly in both directions. Mara had watched the track and the meeting edges of the frame, and she had already recorded that the mechanism was smooth. Now that it had been at rest for a while, she could confirm that it remained fully seated. She tucked the pencil along the logbook spine and carried the book beneath one arm. The cloth stayed in her other hand as she returned to the gradual rise. Her palm moved along the dry rail. The low lamps gave enough light for each step and left the glass above free from glare. As she climbed, the air cooled slightly against her face. The glass walk remained visible below, its reflected lamps making a second, dimmer path beside the real one. At the upper landing, Mara placed the logbook on the level surface near the control. She laid the cloth beside it and looked along the join where the moving roof section met the fixed frame. The line remained even. She began at the end nearest the control and followed the join with her eyes before touching anything. Then she rested 2 fingers lightly against the fixed frame and moved them along the edge as far as the landing allowed. There was no raised section and no place where the meeting surfaces had shifted apart. The roof had returned cleanly after its earlier movement and remained in its proper, closed position. Mara looked down at the visible track. Faint, dry line marked the passage of the moving section. The track itself was clear, though a little dust had gathered on the fixed lip beside it outside the traveled path. She opened the cloth once more and chose a narrow, clean fold. Keeping well away from the part that moved, she wiped the fixed lip in one slow pass. The cloth followed the metal edge without entering the track. At the far end of her reach, she lifted it rather than dragging it back over the clean surface. A pale trace of dust showed on the fabric. She folded that trace inside and inspected the lip again. It now matched the rest of the frame, clean without looking polished. The track remained untouched and clear. Mara set the cloth down and rested her hand on the control, but she did not operate it. The full movement had already been tested. Repeating it without need would not make the mechanism more ready. Gentle work sometimes meant knowing when the useful action was complete. Instead, she checked the control's resting position, then looked once more at the seated roof section. Both were as they should be. She opened the logbook. The observatory notes remained in their practical order, followed by the lines she had added at the shelf. Visitor register checked and returned to shelf. Public stargazing register in order. Beneath them, Mara wrote, "Fixed edge wiped. Roof remains evenly seated." The pencil moved steadily across the page. Its dry sound seemed a little clearer in the enclosed roof space, though it remained soft. When the sentence was finished, she left a small space below it and read the observatory entry from the beginning. Track clear. Frame aligned. Handrail wiped. Test smooth. Full movement even. Resting position aligned. Closed evenly after full preparation check. The register had been checked and returned. The fixed edge was clean. The roof remained seated. Each line belonged to something she had actually seen or done. Nothing had been added merely to fill the page. Mara closed the logbook partway. The folded ripening guide showed between the earlier leaves, still secure where she had placed it. She pressed the cover down gently until the book was shut, then tucked the pencil along its spine. Before leaving, she folded the cloth into a smaller square. The clean side faced outward, ready for another ordinary surface later in the round. She ran that clean side once over the portion of the handrail beside the control, removing the faint print left by her resting palm. Then she folded the cloth again. The maintenance task had narrowed with each action. First the shelf, then the register label, then the roof's seated edge, the fixed lip, the written record, and finally the rail. There was nothing left spreading outward from it. Every object had returned to rest. Mara stood quietly at the landing. Above her, the thin clouds softened the sky beyond the roof glass. The moving section sat closed within its frame. The control waited in its resting position. The low lamps showed the rail and the clear route without brightening the whole observatory. Below, the visitor register could be seen on its shelf at the edge of the glass walk. Its dark cover made a simple rectangle beneath the lamp. The public stargazing notes were closed inside it, ready for another evening, but requiring nothing from this one. Mara lifted the logbook and began down. Her hand followed the rail she had wiped. The air grew a little warmer with each few steps, and the lamps of the glass walk rose around her. At the bottom, she stopped beside the shelf and gave the register one final glance. The label remained flat. The book remained square. The path remained clear. She placed the folded cloth beside her logbook for a moment and added no further note. The record already said enough. Instead, she looked back toward the observatory roof, where the mechanism rested beneath the thin cloud. Then, along the glass walk with its calm line of lamps. The work had visibly settled behind her. Nothing moved except the faint reflections that changed as she shifted her weight. Mara picked up the cloth, held the logbook comfortably beneath her arm, and turned toward the familiar return path. Mara picked up the folded cloth, settled the logbook beneath her arm, and turned toward the familiar return path. From the shelf beside the visitor register, the route was easy to follow. The glass walk extended away beneath a line of low lamps, then curved gently enough that the farther panes disappeared behind their own reflections. The observatory lay in the other direction, above the gradual rise she had just descended. For the moment, Mara walked away from it, giving herself the length of the glass walk in which to check the approach as an arriving visitor would find it. She passed beneath the first lamp. Its warm pool reached across the floor without leaving a dark edge beyond it. In the pane beside her, the same light appeared softer and farther away, as though another quiet passage ran parallel to the real one. Outside, the coast remained beneath thin cloud. The gray beyond the glass was even and still, with no rain marking the panes. Mara let her free hand move briefly along the rail. It was dry. The folded cloth rested in her palm, its used sides tucked inward, and the logbook sat securely against her ribs. Nothing had been left behind on the shelf. The visitor register remained square beneath its lamp, its label facing the walk. At the second lamp, she paused and looked back. The return to the observatory could be traced without effort. First came the line of lamps along the glass walk, then the dark, modest rectangle of the register on its shelf. Beyond it, the rail began its gradual rise. The upper landing was partly hidden by the angle, but the roof glass could be seen above, holding the pale tone of the cloud. It was a simple public route, and the register had explained its use plainly. Visitors came along this walk for ordinary stargazing. They followed the lamps, took the rail upward, and stood beneath the roof while it opened at its slow, comfortable pace. Some evenings offered the moon or a bright planet. Some offered only a few stars between layers of cloud. The notes had treated both kinds of evening as worthwhile. Mara did not need to imagine anything beyond what the pages had said. The register was neither a puzzle nor a record of unusual events. It belonged to a publicly used observatory, and its entries described people looking at the ordinary night sky together. The careful preparation around her, the clear floor, the dry handrail, the low light, and the measured roof mechanism served that familiar purpose. She continued a little farther along the glass walk. The air remained cooler here than in the rooms below, though the enclosed panes kept it comfortable. Each step carried her through one pool of lamplight and into the next. The spacing was regular. A visitor could walk without hurry and without having to search for the path. Mara stopped where the curve of the glass made the observatory shelf almost disappear from view. This was far enough for the return check. She turned, and the route revealed itself again, one part at a time. The nearest lamp stood a few steps ahead. Beyond it waited the second lamp, reflected twice in the long panes. Farther on, the visitor register rested beneath its own light. Beside the shelf, the rail marked the beginning of the gradual ascent. Above that, the observatory roof waited under thin cloud. Mara began back. Her pace was even, and her footsteps remained soft on the floor. As she passed each lamp, the next took its place ahead of her. The reflections shifted with her movement, drawing together and separating again without disturbing the quiet of the walk. At the shelf, she stopped. The register had not moved. Its paper label remained flat against the softened cloth cover. Mara read the two plain words once more, then looked from the book to the rising path. Visitor register. The name was sufficient. The entries inside had confirmed the rest. Public stargazing hours, familiar views above the coast, and an observatory roof that opened slowly enough for everyone beneath it to settle into the cooler air. Its purpose was practical, modest, and complete. Mara placed her logbook on the clear part of the shelf and opened it to the observatory entry. The folded ripening guide showed faintly between the earlier pages, still secure in its place. She took the pencil from the spine and added one short line beneath her maintenance notes. Return route clear from Glass Walk. The pencil made its dry, companionable sound. Mara looked at the words, then at the path itself. The note described exactly what she had checked and nothing more. She closed the logbook and tucked the pencil back along its spine. There was no need to open the visitor register again. It had already given its explanation, and she had already returned it to order. Instead, Mara lifted her own book, took the folded cloth in her other hand, and placed her palm on the rail. The ascent began gently. At the first few steps, the visitor register remained level with her shoulder. Then the shelf fell gradually below. Its lamp continued to show the label for a little while before the angle of the rise hid the words from view. Mara followed the rail upward. The surface was smooth and dry beneath her hand. The air cooled by small degrees, first at her face and then across the fingers holding the cloth. Below, the glass walk stretched away in its calm line, every lamp joined to the next by a modest overlap of light. At the middle of the rise, she stopped and turned her head. From here, the public route was even clearer. The walk brought visitors toward the shelf. The register marked the observatory's ordinary use. The handrail carried the path upward. Nothing blocked the way, and nothing required explanation from anyone standing there for the first time. Mara continued to the upper landing. The roof section remained seated evenly in its frame. The fixed lip she had wiped was clean, and the visible track held no obstruction. The control rested where she had left it after the earlier checks. Above the glass, thin clouds spread softly across the night. She placed the logbook on the level surface beside the mechanism and laid the folded cloth next to it. The pencil stayed tucked along the spine, where the moving air could not disturb it. Before touching the control, Mara walked the short circuit of the landing once more. She looked along the rail, then down the rise toward the glass walk. The path remained clear. She followed the meeting edge of the roof section with her eyes. It remained straight. She checked the visible track from near end to far end. Nothing had changed since her maintenance round. The full movement had already been tested, so this was no longer an inspection made from uncertainty. It was the next ordinary stage of preparation. The roof could now be opened to its intended position for a quiet interval beneath the cloud, just as it would be before a public stargazing hour. Mara returned to the control. She set her feet comfortably apart and rested one hand upon it. Her shoulders remained loose. With slow, even pressure, she began the movement. The roof section traveled along its track with the same low, steady sound as before. The meeting edge drew away from the fixed frame. A narrow opening appeared overhead, and the pale reflections on the glass began to slide. Cool night air entered gradually. It touched Mara's forehead, passed across her hands, and moved down toward the glass walk. The change was mild enough to follow from one breath to the next. She could understand again why a visitor had mentioned it in the register. The slow opening gave the room time to become open. It did not ask anyone beneath it to adjust all at once. Mara kept her eyes on the track while the section continued its measured travel. The band of sky widened. Thin clouds softened the darkness above, revealing no sharp stars just then, only quiet variations of gray over the coast. When the roof reached the prepared position, Mara released the control. The movement ended gently. She waited with her hand nearby and looked along the resting section. It sat evenly on the track. The open space above was broad enough for the observatory's ordinary purpose, while the surrounding glass and rail kept the landing sheltered and familiar. Below, the lamps of the glass walk still showed the whole way back. The register rested on its shelf at the foot of the rise, closed around its plain record of public evenings. The route between book and roof was now fully known. Shelf, rail, gradual ascent, upper landing, and the slow mechanism beneath the cloud. Mara opened her logbook and wrote, "Roof open to prepared position. Movement even." She set the pencil beside the book and left the page open, only long enough for the line to settle. Then she tucked the pencil safely along the spine and closed the cover. The discovery in the register required nothing further. Its ordinary purpose had been confirmed by the place itself. The walk was clear, the lamps were low, the rail was dry, and the roof opened slowly for people who came to look at the public night sky. Mara stood beside the control, while cooler air moved softly through the opening. Her logbook and folded cloth rested together on the level surface. The mechanism had completed its outward travel smoothly and waited beneath her hand for the closing movement when the interval was done. For now, the roof remained open, beneath thin cloud, the return path glowed below, and every part was ready for its calm, familiar close. For a while, Mara remained beside the control with the observatory roof open above her. The mechanism had completed its outward travel and come to rest in the prepared position. Around the opening, the fixed panes held pale reflections from the low lamps. Beyond them, thin cloud covered the sky in quiet layers of gray. No stars showed clearly just then, and none were needed. The public stargazing register had already explained that some evenings offered the moon, some a few stars, and some only the pleasure of standing beneath the open sky. Tonight, the roof offered cool air and the softened darkness above the coast. Mara rested one hand on the rail. Its surface was smooth and dry beneath her palm. The cooler air touched her forehead and moved lightly across the backs of her hands before passing down the gradual rise toward the glass walk. Below, the lamps continued in their familiar line, each warm pool of light overlapping gently with the next. Her logbook and folded cloth rested together on the level surface beside the mechanism. The pencil remained tucked along the book's spine. Nothing lay in the path, and nothing required another decision. The interval with the roof open had been long enough. Mara looked once along the visible track. The moving section sat evenly in its prepared position. She followed the line from the near end to the far end, then glanced down the return path. The visitor register remained on its shelf at the foot of the rise, its dark cover square beneath the lamp. The glass walk beyond it was clear. She placed both feet comfortably and brought her hand to the control. The closing movement began with slow, even pressure. At first, the change was almost entirely in the reflections. The pale shapes of the lamps shifted across the moving pane, drawing nearer to their resting places. Then the open band of sky began to narrow. The roof section traveled steadily along its track, and the cooler current passing through the observatory softened, little by little. Mara kept her attention on the near edge. There was no need to urge the mechanism onward. Its pace was part of its design. The visitor, whose notes she had read, had appreciated that slowness when the roof opened, and the same quality made the close feel complete without being abrupt. The room became enclosed by degrees. Cool air continued to touch Mara's face, then grew fainter. The sounds of the glass walk remained unchanged below. The section moved nearer to the fixed frame. Mara eased her pressure slightly, allowing the final part of the travel to remain as measured as the first. The open strip above became narrow. Thin cloud could still be seen through the surrounding panes, pale and quiet, while the moving edge approached its place. The roof met the frame gently. Its low movement ended. The reflections settled. The remaining current of outside air faded until the observatory held only its usual coolness. Mara kept her hand near the control for a few breaths, then let it fall easily to her side. The roof was closed beneath thin cloud. She did not immediately reach for the logbook. First, she looked along the join where the moving section had returned to the fixed frame. The line was straight. The pane sat evenly within its place, as it had after the earlier tests. She followed the visible track with her eyes and found it clear. Then she made one slow circuit of the upper landing. At the first low lamp, she looked up at the seated edge. At the next, she ran her hand lightly along the dry rail. Her footsteps were soft and even. With the roof closed, the air no longer moved down toward the glass walk, but a trace of outdoor coolness remained across the metal and glass. At the far side, Mara paused. The cloud above had no sharp outline. It seemed lighter in one place and deeper in another. Its variations softened further by the closed roof pane. A faint reflection of the nearest lamp rested across the glass without hiding the sky completely. Mara breathed in the cool, still air and turned back toward the mechanism. Her logbook waited where she had left it. The folded cloth lay beside it, clean side outward. She picked up the book, drew the pencil from its spine, and opened to the observatory entry. The earlier notes followed the work in its proper order. The track had been clear, the frame had been aligned, the handrail had been wiped. Both the test and the full preparation movement had been smooth. The visitor register had been checked and returned to its shelf. The route from the glass walk had been clear. Finally, the roof had been opened to its prepared position with even movement. Mara placed the pencil at the next empty line. She wrote, "Roof closed evenly beneath thin cloud." Final check complete, the pencil made its dry, companionable sound over the paper. When the final word was in place, she lifted the point and read the sentence once. It said enough. There was no further question in the visitor register and no unfinished part of the roof operation. The public purpose of the modest observatory was clear. The roof had opened slowly for its ordinary interval, and it had closed at the same careful pace. The mechanism was at rest, the track was clear, and the route below remained ready. Mara left the page open for a moment. The folded ripening guide showed between the earlier leaves of the logbook. Its pale edge recalled the work already completed in the warm room of winter fruit. The labels, the baskets, the oranges beside the shaded lamp. She touched the guide lightly with the back of one finger, confirming that it was still secure, then brought the cover down. The pencil returned to the spine. She folded the cloth once, making a neat square, and ran its clean surface along the short section of rail beside the control. The pass removed the faint warmth left by her hand. She folded the cloth again and held it loosely. There was no need to operate the roof a second time. There was no need to rewrite the entry or add another description of the sky. The useful work had reached its ordinary end. Mara stood at the landing and let the finished state of the room remain unchanged around her. The closed glass overhead held the thin cloud. The roof section rested evenly within its frame. The control had returned to stillness. The rail curved toward the gradual descent. Below, the lamps of the glass walk waited in a calm line. After a little while, Mara lifted the logbook beneath one arm and began down. Her free hand followed the rail. The air warmed by small degrees as she descended, though the coolness of the observatory remained for a time across her forehead and fingers. With each step, the glass walk rose more fully into view. The visitor register appeared first as a dark shape on its shelf. Then its pale paper label became readable beneath the lamp. It remained exactly where Mara had placed it, spine toward the observatory and cover facing the walk. She reached the bottom of the rise and stopped beside it. There was nothing more to read. The pages had already given their plain account of public evenings beneath the sky, and Mara had already returned the book to its familiar outline on the shelf. She looked only long enough to see that the label was still flat and the passage around it clear. Her own logbook stayed closed beneath her arm. Mara moved a few steps into the glass walk. Here, the lamps seemed warmer than they had at the roof. Their modest pools joined across the floor, and their reflections made a second, dimmer row in the long panes. Outside, the coast remained folded into the gray of the night. The thin clouds softened the darkness without pressing against the glass. She paused beneath the second lamp and looked back. From this distance, the observatory roof appeared settled into the conservatory's larger frame. The moving section could still be distinguished by its straight edges, but nothing in its appearance suggested a task waiting to be finished. It was simply closed now, pale cloud above it, and the dry rail leading down. Mara felt the weight of the logbook against her side. It was not heavy, but its steady presence suited the quiet of the return. The pages held the sequence she had completed, each line brief and practical. Anyone reading the night record later would know that the mechanism had traveled evenly. The register was in order, the route was clear, and the roof had been closed after the prepared interval. She continued along the walk at an easy pace. At one pane, the reflection of a lamp rested beside her shoulder. At the next, it slipped behind her, and another appeared ahead. The changes were slight, enough to give the walk a gentle rhythm without making it feel new. Her hand no longer needed the rail, so she let it rest around the folded cloth. The fabric was dry and soft at the edges from use. She could still feel a little coolness in it from the observatory landing. Halfway along the curve, Mara stopped once more. The visitor register was now partly hidden by the angle of the glass. The roof lay beyond it, closed and quiet. Ahead, the lamps continued through the walk in the same measured spacing. Nothing drew her urgently in either direction. Behind her was completed work. Ahead was only the next ordinary part of the night shift, familiar in its pace and carrying no demand from this hour. Mara opened the logbook beneath the nearest lamp, not to add another entry, but simply to confirm the pencil was secure. It lay neatly along the spine. The folded ripening guide remained between the earlier pages. The final observatory line rested beneath the others, plain and complete. Roof closed evenly beneath thin cloud. Final check complete. She closed the cover again. The small sound of it settling was absorbed by the quiet glass walk. Mara held the book beneath her arm and looked through the pane beside her. The cloud showed as a soft gray field beyond her own faint reflection. Nearer at hand, the glass felt cool without being cold. The lamp above her gave a mild warmth to one side of her face. She remained there for several slow breaths. Cool glass, warm lamplight, the dry edge of the folded cloth against her palm, the comfortable weight of the logbook. Farther back, the roof stayed closed. The visitor register stayed square on its shelf. The clear path between them needed no further check. Mara resumed walking. Her footsteps passed from one pool of light to the next. Reflections gathered beside her, drifted across the panes, and fell behind. The observatory receded gently without becoming unfamiliar. It had joined the other completed parts of her round, a place inspected, tended, recorded, and returned to rest. At the end of the glass walk, she turned once more. Only the nearest part of the rising rail could be seen from there. Above it, a portion of the observatory glass held the thin cloud. The roof mechanism itself was quiet and out of reach, exactly as it should be after the completed close. Mara did not go back. She placed one hand on the closed cover of the logbook and let the finished record remain finished. The public stargazing hour described in the register belonged to other evenings. The roof would open again when its ordinary use required it. For this night, its operation was complete. The lamps continued to glow along the glass walk. Their light rested on the floor and in the panes, warm against the muted gray outside. Mara stood within that steady line for a moment longer. Calm and unhurried, while the conservatory settled around the work she had done. Then she continued toward her next ordinary round, carrying the logbook and folded cloth. Behind her, the visitor register remained in place. Above it, the roof remained closed beneath thin cloud. Nothing waited unresolved.